So we're doing this video in my pajamas because apparently that's the energy that we're bringing into 2021. Hey all, it's Starzy and today we are going to be doing my January wrap-up because 2021 is here. I'm also just realizing just how much Star Wars I have going on today, but honestly that's pretty on brand for this house, so. Alright, there's quite a mix of things from January, so let's just get right on into it. The first thing that I read in January was actually Lake of Tears by Emily Rodda, which is the second book in the Del Toro Quest series. I actually listened to the audiobook of this because I recently saw that the audiobooks had just been added to my library's digital catalogue, and so I thought, I guess this is the time that I'm going to be rereading my childhood favourites, because this is a children's fantasy series where you are following a few people who are going on this quest to restore the belt of Del Toro, which is what you can see on the spines of the books, so that they can drive out the basically the evil that took over the world. This is kind of a dark fantasy series in a lot of ways, especially for a children's series where there's a lot of kind of death and misery, and you've got this evil presence that's controlling the land, and that's why they're going on a quest to kind of drive it out. But yeah, my childhood favorite series. It was very nostalgic listening to this, and I enjoyed every minute of it, and I'm really looking forward to continuing listening to it. It's also not a series I see many people talk about. I know most people's favourite childhood series is the one we don't talk about anymore, but this has always been mine, and I guess it's what got me into that kind of darker fantasy from a very young age as well. So, the next thing I read was The Tunnel of Dreams by Bernard Beckett, which is another children's fantasy. I guess that's where I was at the beginning of January. New Year, just wanted kind of easy, enjoyable, fun reads. This is another random book that I just picked up through my library. It is portal fantasy, essentially. You've got these twins who follow a girl down a portal that kind of takes them into a parallel world, and they have to they're trying to help this girl save her own twin sister who is in that world, and you've got magic and talking animals and all of that good stuff. I mean, I read it at the beginning of the month, and it's one of those things that, again, a lot of books I read, and even if I'm really enjoying them at the time, a lot just kind of flips out of the memory, but I enjoyed it enough while I was reading it. Not my favourite thing ever, but it was a fun children's fantasy. So, the next thing that I listened to, I wasn't in love with, and that was Heroes, Mortals and Monsters, Quests and Adventures by Stephen Fry. So Stephen Fry is someone who I have had a lot of exposure to through QI and other British game shows and stuff. I've watched a lot of those. I love Greek mythology, right? So this is Stephen Fry retelling a bunch of Greek myths involving heroes, essentially, and I love Greek mythology. It's, you know, classics is what I started studying at uni. It was always my passion area. So these are stories that I'm largely familiar with, although since I haven't visited the stories in so long, I'd forgotten some of them. But I love mythology. I was familiar with a lot of these stories. And it's, you know, an obviously very well-researched book, and I didn't hate listening to it. My problems came with, one, I feel like the modern humour he was using throughout it didn't always work or didn't sit right. You know when an author overuses a word or phrase, and once you've noticed it once, you can't stop noticing it? In this book, it was the word penetrate. And every time I saw it, all I could think of was you know, Pitch Perfect, where Rebel Wilson is not a good enough reason to use the word penetrate. That's all I could think of why? Yeah, there was a disconnect with the humour, and also I found it a bit confusing in the way it was told too, because he tried to fit so many different stories in here that it would often just jump from one thing to another, and so it was a bit hard to keep track of. especially because I was listening to it. When you're listening to something and it's jumping all over the place quickly, it's a lot harder to keep track of what was going on. And like, I'm someone who's familiar with these stories and I was still having trouble keeping track. So if you're unfamiliar, I'm sure it would be even more difficult. So there was that. There was the humor, the structure of it, and also just falling into the trap of, well, not falling into the trap, but just the fact of like, it followed traditional retellings of mythology in a lot of ways in terms of like the placement of women within them, which isn't necessarily, you know, the fault of Stephen Fry. It's, you know, that they were told like that to begin with. But I didn't always love how the women were sidelined in these stories. But again, I know they often were in the traditional myths. It's just, I mean, when you're writing them, you get to choose the focus. But no, it was mostly the humor and the structure, and I just wasn't really enjoying it that much. Like, it had its moments and it was interesting enough, and I love Greek mythology, but definitely not one of my favorite mythology retellings overall. And that's kind of where my feelings ended up on that, I think. Then I read Umbrella Academy Volume 1. So I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with Umbrella Academy because of the Netflix adaptation. But the original comic books were written by Gerard Way, who is the frontman of My Chemical Romance, which has, you know, been my favorite band since I was like 14. So I've always been interested in the comics because of that fact, but I finally got around to reading the first one, and I don't entirely know how I feel. Like, I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. So it's one of those ones where I just kind of felt like this is a little bit confusing and weird, and the art style wasn't necessarily my favorite, but it was okay. Overall, do I prefer the first season of Umbrella Academy? Would I rather watch it than read this? Probably. Then I read Volume 2 of Zodiac Star Force, which is another comic book. I read the first one in December, I think. These are magical girls based after zodiac signs, and I didn't enjoy this as much as the first one, I feel, and I can't even remember exactly why. I had a lot going on, and I just didn't feel like I wasn't enjoying everything that was going on as much. I still enjoyed it though. Like, the art's still beautiful, the whole concept's still like cute and fun. So I think I gave it 3 stars, which I don't think I've been telling my ratings for anything. I gave 5 stars to Lake of Tears, and yes, some of that may be nostalgia, but you know. 3 stars to Tunnel of Dreams, maybe a 2.5 to Heroes, a 3 maybe just because of the fact of like the effort and research that's gone into it, but I don't know. I don't know how I feel. Gave 3 stars to Umbrella Academy, 3 stars to Zodiac Star Force. And the rest of the books I read, I do actually have physically in front of me for a change. And then I finished Green Witchcraft by Paige Vanderbeck, which is a non-fiction witchcraft book about green witchcraft. So it has some stuff about plants and connecting to the earth and all that kind of stuff. Very basic, beginner's type book. Decent enough for what it is. I think you always have to go in with a very critical eye when you're looking at witchcraft books. I mean, really any books, especially any non-fiction, but especially witchcraft. You always need to go in with your critical eye and stuff. Never take anything as fact, but that's a whole deeper discussion to have. It's a very pretty book, and yeah, decent for just being a very basic beginner witchcraft book. The only thing which is the case with a lot of these type of books is you know, they're often slightly less relevant to me living in Australia, because I'm in a different hemisphere and have different native plants and all of that kind of stuff, but nothing wrong with it. Didn't rate it. I rarely rate witchcraft books. They're kind of whatever you make of them most of the time, but a decent little one. Then I listened to another audiobook of another book that I read as a child. So this is my original copy of Northern Lights by Philip Pullman, which is a fantasy trilogy, children's fantasy series, where you are following Lyra, who is like 12 years old or something, and kind of her misadventures, and in this world, there's lots of interesting things going on in this world, and there's also something about this series also is there's a lot of kind of theological and philosophical discussion within it, especially like questioning religion and what we should believe and how people twist beliefs for their own purposes and all of those kind of things within it. But there's, in this world, everyone has like demons connected to them, which are essentially just like, they take animal forms and they're kind of your permanent companion that you're like connected to, which is, there's just lots of cool concepts. You've also got like armored bears and other fun things going on in here. And I didn't realize just how deeply ingrained this book was in my memory until I started listening to it and was like, wow, I actually remember every single thing that is happening in this scene. Like, it was such a weird experience to have, because when I've seen people bring up this series before, which, what's it called, is Dark Materials? When I've seen people talk about this series before, I'm like, oh yeah, I read that as a kid, but I never really thought about it beyond that. But it's like, no, I actually remember so much from this. It's so vivid in my mind, and it was an experience, and I really enjoyed listening to it, and I'm definitely going to continue the series probably this year at some point. I really enjoyed it, really liked this, maybe like 4.5 stars. If you want to continue Del Toro series, I'm going to continue this, and maybe I'll be visiting some other books from my childhood as well, because I've been having a lot of fun with that. And this book, especially now, looking at it with my adult, educated, critical mind, like, there's just so much in this book to unpack and explore as well. Like, it's a ride. It's a ride. But it's also got all that magical children's whimsy as well, so like, it's beautiful. I did enjoy this book. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars, but there were some things. So this is Pocket Apocalypse by Seanan McGuire. I'm sure that's a name a lot of people recognise. But this is an urban fantasy series, and I think this is actually like the 4th book in the series. And no, I haven't read any of the other books in the series, but I don't feel like that impacted my experience like at all. I mean, I have a lot of experience picking up books in series that aren't the first one. I've spoken about that before, but especially with urban fantasy, I feel like it often doesn't matter, because they recap so much of previous events in these books often, which this one did as well, where it's like it barely matters. So what this series actually is we're following like these group of people who are basically working to conserve and protect cryptids, which are like creatures and species within the world that, you know, the everyday man doesn't know about or doesn't believe in. So you've got all those kind of mythical creatures and stuff in here. And in this one in particular, they go to Australia because there is a werewolf virus outbreak there. So, and yes, there were a lot of stereotypes when it comes to Australia in here. I mean, even just the back. I mean, this is something that I know was just this is something that was just clearly played up for the fact of this book and the fact there are like deadly creatures and stuff going on. But even on the very back, it's like endangered, adjective, threatened with extinction or immediate harm, Australia, noun, a good place to become endangered. Just because there's a common conception that Australia is just a deadly place to be because we have all these deadly creatures, which, you know, isn't entirely false, but like, the everyday person doesn't come in contact with any of these any more than maybe once in their life. Like, if you're living in a city or something, you don't really come in contact with all the deadly snakes and spiders or jellyfish and all that kind of stuff all that much. So, and yet I have had people tell me that they're scared to come to Australia because of all the spiders and stuff. I don't know. So there's that. Aside from that, yeah, there are other things as well. And also another thing I found funny was that the white American was the progressive one of this book who was telling all the Australians that they needed to be more accepting of those who are unlike them, essentially. Which, yes, Australia has a lot of racism and other problems, but the white American is the progressive one, huh? Alright. We're not gonna get into that. We don't need to get into that discussion though. It's just one of those things I noticed. But really, one of the main things that held back my enjoyment of this book was actually the family. The family portrayed in this book are awful. And I had to spend a whole book alongside them just thinking how terrible they all were. So that was kind of one of the main things that came out down to, especially because often in these type of books, like, the family and family relations can be something that make me love a book. Like, I've talked so much about the Hidden Legacy series, and that one of the things I love about that series is that I love the family and all their dynamics. So then to have an urban fantasy series where the family that we're stuck with, for this book at least, were just awful. And I didn't like any of them, really. And then there was just all the little plot things of like, why would you not say anything? Why would... But, you know, that all goes into spoiler territory. But yeah, I still gave it 3 stars because it was a fun enough ride. There were some things. So they're all the books I read. I'm going to just quickly go over some of the other media that I consumed in January. The first movie that I watched in January was Scream 3. I do really enjoy the Scream franchise overall, but this one I gave 3 stars. I think it was just like kind of like the most underwhelming of the series overall. If you've never heard of Scream somehow, it's a horror franchise that are horror movies in their own right, while also often having kind of a commentary on horror tropes, and they're slasher films and they're a lot of fun. Yeah, didn't like this one as much as like 1 and 2, but you know, still not an awful thing to watch on an afternoon as I did. The other thing I watched was Ava, which is not necessarily a good movie, but it was watchable enough for me. I found it interesting enough. It's a movie about a female spy and kind of her family drama, amongst other things. Yeah, there were definitely some things that weren't fantastic about it, but it was watchable enough, I think, so I gave it 2.5. And then we did also watch a bunch of TV in January. So what are some of the things we watched? This is where I have to try and use my memory, which never goes well. So, something that my boyfriend made me watch, which I had no intention of watching, even though everyone else has been watching it recently, and that is Fate, the Winx Saga. Is that what it's called? That show that just came on Netflix, which is the live-action Winx Club. But it's not really Winx Club at all, and I think you really need to separate it in your mind as something like a completely separate entity, because they've changed so much, like it's almost unrecognizable. Yeah, I had no intention of watching it, but he wanted to, and you know, it was watchable. It had its moments, just as most of the bad TV does. You know, liken it to things like Riverdale. I don't know what to say. We watched it. It's a thing that happened. Yeah, it was enjoyable at times, but it also did some really stupid things. Like, the one thing that stuck in my head that I was even, like, out loud questioning at the time was there's this scene where these 2 boys are arguing and the camera's just, like, spinning around them for a good few minutes. It's like, please stop. Just stop. Choices were made. Choices were made. In the vein of things that everyone's been watching, I also binged Bridgerton in one day. That's a testament to how kind of addictive and watchable that is, that I watched the whole thing in one day. It also has its problems. And when I say Bridgerton has its problems, like it really has its problems. Like the assault scene in the bedroom. Yeah. But yeah, very watchable, and I wasn't surprised by the reveal at the end at all. I kind of had my suspicions about from very early on. But yeah, it was a fun time despite its problems, I guess. We also watched the latest season of Sabrina, the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, which I feel like I feel like at the beginning of Sabrina it had kind of a darker tone to it, and at this stage it just feels like a teenage drama production. That's the best way I can describe it. Still very watchable, again, in the way those shows can be, but that's kind of how I feel about it. And also, I was kind of mad at the end of that. The end of Sabrina, if anyone's watched, what season are we up to? Season 4? The ending was not happy about that. That was not romantic, that was stupid, and you are contributing to why people think that Romeo and Juliet is more of a romance than a tragedy. No. I feel like they're the only things we've really watched in completion. Also started watching the recent season of American Gods now that that's back on. I kind of really enjoy that show and it's all its weirdness and mythology and everything like that. I also started watching The Strand. I've never read the book by Stephen King, and I also feel like it's a really interesting time to be releasing an adaptation of a story about a deadly pandemic. It felt kind of weird to be watching that, but I don't know how many episodes I am into that, but I don't know entirely how I feel at this point either. Like, it's definitely interesting, but like, I'm not like hooked, you know? I'm watching WandaVision, and that is a trip. I've actually really been enjoying WandaVision. Like, even on the surface level of just like the sitcom thing, that's been a lot of fun, but also because it has that, the uncomfortable mystery kind of underlying it had in the first few episodes. I was also kind of really enjoying that, and all like the theories everyone was talking about. And obviously then episode 4 happened, and yeah, so I'm having a lot of fun with that. Big comic book geek here, so that's fun. Is there anything else? Oh, and then there might be something else that I've just forgotten at the time, but the other thing that I do remember, the other thing that my boyfriend put on, because this is what happens when he has control of what we're watching apparently. What's it called? Bling Empire? Another thing on Netflix. It's like a reality show about really rich Asians, and those kind of shows are always interesting. Why? When I like some trashy TV, but when I say I like trashy TV, it's usually like those Netflix shows that I just talked about, not reality TV. So choices were made, Nathan. Choices were made. Anyway, yeah, I think that's most of the things that I read and watched that I can remember at this point in time. So let me know if you have consumed any of this media and what you thought of it. What was your favourite thing you read in January? Let's talk stuff in the comments as usual. Oh, I'm losing the plot. Otherwise, yeah, stay safe, stay educated, and Starzy out.